it's 40 acres, but it's subject to old subdivision, but there is no, the water and sewer would have to be brought into the 40 acres.
Yeah. Anything else in town, Janine?
And the last one is Western Villa Estates. It's a manufactured dwelling park. It used to be limited to seniors.
Hold on, I can't write that fast. Western Village Estates?
Estates.
But is Western Villa actually in the city? Or was it cut out of the city?
It's in the county.
Okay, you want to take it then?
Well,
Yeah, I talked to someone yesterday. Their CCRs have changed so that it's open to anyone. There's several spaces, and they are receptive to certain RVs. There are CCRs, so they won't accept everything, but certain RVs would qualify for being placed there. Owners' children are driving to town today and was interested in providing more information probably tomorrow. That's the, the large numbers. There, you might find an individual lot here and there, but they would be buried.
So, thank you, Janine. So the only other area that I, as a planner, looking at the town zoning, I would think of the eastern blocks of the Kogar where his options are, right? So he didn't include these lots north of South 3rd Street, east of Roberta Road. These 3 lots is I'm kind of going over as part of where he had hookups for RVs during the Ruby Pipeline days. He used that as a buffer apparently for residential use at some point. So those are all platted lots. I don't have what are platted lots. I have the tax lot layer up. So there are on each side of these blocks there's 24, 25 by 130 foot lots. So those could be grouped into 50 foot. So you could essentially have 12 more lots on each of these blocks. So I'm not sure if this one has that many, but.
Darwin, did I understand that was temporary housing when the pipeline was built?
Right, yep. So, and I don't have, it was essentially, an area that was about like this, that was used for the RVs. And it was 80 space, well, it was 100, probably 15 or 20 spaces at that time. Then the county across the road includes some additional area for housing during that pipeline days too. So, and that infrastructure's still there. Needs some fixes real quick, but that'll become available hopefully shortly too.
Red Rock's working with us on that.
Yeah, exactly. So
that was dorm housing up there.
Yeah.
So it sounds like the county is working on reestablishing the county land as a site for temporary housing.
For dorm housing possibly.
And there may be some spots in this mobile home park for RVs.
There is a permanent RV park, which was part of the original temporary park. There's 82 spaces. That's open and available right now.
What is that called? Do we know?
Tall Town RV.
And did you say 80 spaces?
That's what I remember, and that is somewhere around 80.
And I know that Commissioner Winters and others are working on the temporary housing. So I'm thinking that maybe it would be best for our conversation today if we focus more on the longer term permanent housing, multifamily, single family, whatever those needs are. Does that sound like the right way? Okay. Darwin, anything else in the county that?
Yeah, so I'm going to switch this from county zoning from town zoning to the county zoning real quick. And
So since we're switching to county and that,
I was hoping things that are nearby the town,
Right.
yeah.
So, Commissioner Mark Owens out of Harney County got a bill passed, or a Senate bill number 2, and what it does is, back in the 60s and 70s, when they made EFU out of most of the state of Oregon, which is exclusive farm use out of the suburbs, Senate Bill 2 allows you to build a house on 10 acres on EFU land. And I don't know all the description on that yet, but it's a new bill that's just been passed this session. So,
Has it been signed into law, Mark?
I know that
We'll follow up.
it just passed in April.
So I thought that bill was to expand urban growth boundaries for development of industry and stuff. Did it put the 10 acres into it, Mark?
It's a Senate Bill 2 would allow 10-acre rural it allowed 10 rural eastern Oregon counties with low growth rates the ability to conduct economic opportunity analysis outside urban growth boundaries and immediate utilize up to 50 acres of commercial industrial purposes without going through cumbersome and hurdle-filled exceptions process of Oregon land use systems.
So commercial and industrial.
Yeah,
Not
commercial
residential, but.
industrial, not residential. I don't believe.
Yeah, it was economic opportunities analysis stuff too.
So, Darwin, are there
So, yeah, let
any
me-
subdivisions
yeah,
that
let me-
are platted close to town that we should know about?
Okay, so what you see up on the screen is, you know, the urban growth boundary, also the enterprise zone is this red outline. The black is the urban growth boundary. So there are a couple areas that are just outside of that. Probably the largest of which would be, you know, Smoky Hill, you know, north of town. Yeah, so all these are rural residential lots, comprehensive plan, and the rural residential, you know, zoning. So they're available for sale. I believe there's, you know, probably a few owners up there that own multiple lots. They, certainly could be enticed to sell if needed. And then really there's a, just north of that and to the west, there's also a comprehensive plan designated rural residential out here. It's not zoned that way, but it would go through a speedy process to get through as a zoning permit on some of this land up here. But it would need to be further divided because most of these lots that are already out here are divided. So that's kind of the stuff that's north of town. That's kind of the biggest stuff on my radar for stuff that would easily fit some housing needs over there. South of town, obviously, there's a lot of, you know, the infrastructure's already there, and then there's a lot of, you know, empty lots, mostly on the kind of the west side of it and east side of M Street. But a lot of that infrastructure, the roads haven't been put in yet, and it's again, mostly
So sewer and
one
water
or
is
two
there?
on. Yeah, sewer and water's close, it would need to be extended, and there would be certainly some service development charges there, but could be included. And that's really the stuff that's close to the urban growth boundary. Anything outside of the urban growth boundary is really gonna require a conditional use permit on, you know, a 10-acre lot or similar size that would be non-farm in nature, really for the, you know, the employee work that we're looking for. You know, the ranches that cover the valley are, you know, pretty well established, and we're not seeing a whole lot of new farm dwellings out there in the valley. It's different than what we're talking about here for this type of employment. But for the most part, we haven't seen a whole lot of opposition from, you know, neighbors with the, you can see how the valley's pretty well divided up with a lot of these existing 10-acre lots that planning commissions often found favorable for highest best use, all that kind of stuff for non-farm.
So Darwin, up on East Street, Hoagland has about 3 or 4 different places.
Right, there are, and those are zoned actually commercial, but there are some empty lots right here on the east side, right off Foothill Drive that he's had for sale at times, but as they're in the growth boundary, you really need to connect to town services, what we prefer, and is pumping it up or getting the water or sewer back down is the hard part, but getting the water up there can be an issue, so.
So it sounds like there is a fair amount of land available that is either currently served or is already platted. And so is that, because we've got 26 lots here that are already platted and developed, have infrastructure in, and of the 26, only 6 are developed. So I want to go back to the gentleman's question that asked, why is there no building? And I'd be interested in your experience, and we heard from Linda about her experience, that you as developers, how long have you had this particular development? It looks like you had 6 builders who were, or at least 6 homes that were built. I don't know if they were built by the same builder. But maybe share a little bit about your experience, and then I'd be interested. We only have, I think, one other builder here, so I'd be interested in people's feedback on what would it take in order to get people to invest in Lakeview.
So, hang on just 1 second. So, we do not want to build houses. Rob and I came from a background, we used to compete against Bogate Construction. We used to own S&B James Construction. So we just wanted to develop lots. We thought we could get in, develop some lots, sell them, and move on. That's all we were after.
Yep.
So, I just want to expand on one other thing, and I'm bummed that the medical person left. If the people from Red Rock, if the Forest Service and BLM could, if the prison could, if the medical community could, commit to leasing buildings. You know, if the medical center said, because of traveling docs and traveling nurses, I'm going to lease 5 duplexes, and I'll sign a letter for a 10-year lease, you're going to be able to get investors to invest in your area. That's what we're not seeing right now. So we thought, and that 13 years ago, this was a slam dunk. We thought we could sell 26 lots, no problem. The price was great. It was half the cost of what we were doing in Klamath Falls. It was a great deal. And we thought people would be knocking our doors over. We really thought we'd be on phases 3 and 4 right now, develop in the back.
So on the Forest Service side of that, usually what we hear is, usually the private interests don't want the federal competition.
I think it would be tough to do with public government money. I think that would be
And I don't know how
difficult
we
to do.
could. but-
Red Rock, the hospital, the school, possibly. I don't. Yeah, they might be public too. So
I
is
guess
the hospital
the
considered
the
public?
missing piece is economics. Someone needs to, the developer, the next phase, whether we build houses and leased them or rented them or not, or somebody else buys our lots and builds houses or apartments, the economics have to work for that person, as Linda said, to buy the lot and pay the subcontractor to come from wherever to build it. And anyway, it has to work out that they can rent the building for enough to, they're not gonna do it for free. They wanna make money, in other words, they want, whatever percentage of that rent needs to come to them, not to pay the mortgage. And that's the missing part is, will people in Lakeview pay enough for what it costs to build a new apartment or house in Lakeview?
So I do not live in Lakeview. What does a lot cost? Roughly.
Well, we started out from 27 to 36,000, and right now if somebody wants to buy a bunch of them, we'll get close to 60% of that. How's that? So how about 18
Matt.
to
I'm just kidding.
$20,000? How's that?
Well, and I kind of put a bug in one of the contractors' ears that why don't we all get together and buy a few of those lots for the price of what Tom was talking about. So that's kind of, maybe I ought to keep working on them to do that. maybe I would let him build another house if I got the lot.
But one of the problems we all know, and nobody's talking about it, is getting back to the picky wives. They don't want to live in Lakeview, like the correction guy said. He said, oh, people don't want to, they want to get out of Lakeview. Well, Lakeview is poor.
Thanks, Steve.
And Lakeview has a poor population. Lakeview has no services to speak of. When going back, when I lived here, there were 7 service stations, there were 4 or 5 grocery stores. That just isn't true anymore, and that's true across rural America. So how do you get picky wives? They may have a mansion to live in, but they can't go to, oh, God forbid, Walmart. Or they can't, so those are things that you can't keep. Is that if you build it, will they come? Will the entrepreneurs come to create businesses? Who knows?
So we've, I think, established a fairly consistent need that's been identified. And so I think that's from people who understand what Lakeview has to offer. Wanted to get your comment next.
I think we have to remember that Lakeview is beautiful and a great place to live. We've got a few problems, but it's a wonderful place to live, and a lot of people are discovering us.
Mm-hmm. That's the problem.
Yeah.
Is if something comes on the market and it's decent, it's gone. That's what, it never happened until this last year. Now we're getting multiple offers on things. And if something's listed and it's priced right and it's a nice place, it's gonna be gone. You better get there and look at it.
So I appreciated this gentleman's comment around employers and how they can be part of the solution. So the governor in her budget had $15 million for what is called the Greater Oregon Housing Accelerator. It passed out of committee with only $5 million in it. And it is money to try to create some collaborative projects with employers to increase housing supply. And I'm not exactly sure how soon the money would be available, but it's really for projects that involve employers and help address employer housing needs. It can involve more than one employer. So I think there is an opportunity and it can involve public and private employers. So I think there is an opportunity that if employers wanted to get together and make an offer on these wonderfully priced lots, that I think has some potential that we could certainly come back to once I have a better understanding at the end of the session about how that's going to look. So that's one idea, and I think what our goal is here is to evaluate kind of what some possible solutions are. And Matt, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I have not done a pro forma for Lakeview. Randy's done some great work in Klamath Falls. Maybe you could kind of help me understand how you did that, and we could come up with some of that information for Lakeview. But Matt, what do you see as some of the barriers to Lakeview? I know you currently do building in Klamath Falls. I don't know where else you do building. What would it take to attract you to do some building in Lakeview?
So, for one, I'm Matt Bogute with Bogute Construction. My father, Rob Bogute, was the owner of Bogute Construction for many, many, many years. We have ties back to Lakeview. We were one of the original main contractor for the main part of the expansion of the hospital early in the days. So, and there's many other projects that we've been involved on in Lakeview. So, it's actually kind of funny as these discussions happened. I've had employees that lived in Lakeview, and just kind of hearing what people say about the community. It's like every employee I've hired from Lakeview just loves the community. The sense of community is amazing here, and so I think the obstacles that Lakeview has, or Lake County in general, are very similar to Klamath County. It's like we were going down these lists, and I was kind of just laughing because we were just talking about this on the way out here. Klamath County is going through the exact same hurdles that Lakeview is. Klamath Falls is in the same position as Lakeview, which is crazy to think about, but the population difference is huge. Bogate Construction is in Klamath County, the only contractor that's built any units of apartments in the last probably 12 years, but definitely the last 10 years. We've been the only contractor to develop any new units. And in this last 12 months, we've put on 50 units online, and we're scheduled to put on an additional 60 units in 2020 in Klamath alone. It's just an industry that we have kind of specialized in is multifamily sector, and in addition to that, higher education. Those are kind of like the two specialties that we do in construction. So kind of hearing all these needs and wants and desires is exactly the problem we're going through in Klamath. And so that's what was appealing for me to come out here, because we've been discussing these same problems for literally 40 years in Klamath Falls. And I sit there, because I'm younger, and I'm like, you know, why didn't we discuss these problems before the uptick in the economy? Like, where was everyone talking about this back then? Why are we just now discussing it? Okay, so we're discussing it still 40 years later, so what are we gonna do about it? So it's actually very interesting, and I think that's where Randy can probably put a lot of his knowledge from Casita for Klamath and for help for you, but the problem is, new construction's expensive. I pay my employees a high wage of living. There's a lot of desirable projects out there. So as a larger contractor, you're going to be more selective of the type of work you're gonna go after. Lakeview is definitely not too far from Klamath. It's an hour and a half, actually. We're doing a ton of work in Coos Bay right now. They would love to be an hour and a half from Klamath versus 4 hours. So I don't think it's a logistics problem or trying to appeal to get a contractor to be in Lakeview. So just to clear the air, I think, you know, we would definitely be interested in being in Lakeview. But additional to that, it's the cost of these developments are very large. You start talking about a 40-unit apartment complex, it's just not gonna plop out of the air. You know, you're talking $10 million. And all of a sudden, when the public hears those numbers, they're like, holy smokes, how can this cost that much money? And then you start doing the paperwork backwards, and you look like, okay, architectural and engineering fees, 20% of that, you know, you just spent $2 million through permitting process, SDC fees, county permitting fees, infrastructure improvements just to get the facility up to the size standards that we need. So we have, you know, today we have building codes that are so much higher than they were 30 years ago. If you built an apartment complex right now in Lakeview, you're gonna have a full-blown fire suppression system, where 40 years ago, they were like, okay, you got a fire extinguisher in each unit, you're good. Well, you know, you're looking at $250,000 cost on a sizable apartment complex just for that fire suppression system. So these are the problems with today. Not saying that it's a bad problem, but there's cost factors associated with all these decisions. So the second you start going to a larger complex facility, you increase more costs. And it's interesting because clients are in the same position. We do a lot of low-income housing, and it's a big public misperception on what low-income housing is. It doesn't mean that they're built poorly, it just means that it's servicing a need of a population that's in need of the housing. It's interesting because that's a double-edged sword, because you have Red Rock making a large investment into the community or other employers. Their employees are paid maybe at a higher rate than someone that doesn't have a job or a good paying job. So they're going to take up the nicer of the rentals. Well, what's gonna happen to those nicer rentals, the people that are in those rentals? They're gonna get displaced to a lesser nice unit. And it just keeps trickling down, because as wage standards increase, people want nicer facilities, they want better for themselves, they want better for their family. That's just human instinct. So it's a problem everywhere. But you know, here, I don't know, it could be a mixture of having that public-private partnership, I think, is kind of the key of these rural communities right now, is what we're seeing is there has to be some sort of investment from government to entice private development, because the cost of just doing it on the private side, the risk is too high, and you're gonna find something to make a decent return on your investment elsewhere. So that's just my input on it, is from a private standpoint, you would have to have a considerable need, you would have to have a contract in hand, okay? The hospital commits to 10 units for 10 years. That's a good example because it just happened in Clown Falls. OHSU just came to Clown Falls, they're building a new $50 million facility to house 200 medical professionals. And the idea behind it is it's rural development it's to attract people that want to come to work in Clown Falls, Lakeview, rural hospitals that are struggling to find medical professionals. So they realized that in Climate, there was the same problem. Hey, there's not enough quality apartments or housing, so we're gonna commit to 20 units as showing our commitment to the community.
So we're gonna commit to paying the rent on the 20 apartments, or we're
They will
gonna purchase?
They
guarantee the rent.
They'll guarantee the rent, so if
but the
if they
rentals-
don't get rented, they'll make up the rent
Right,
difference.
okay,
So
okay.
it's a guaranteed rent lease, so yeah, you're gonna get a smaller return on your investment, but you have a guarantee, so you're willing to take more risk.
But you can sell the papers on that day in and day out. Investors will jump all over that.
Yeah, because you have.
If
a
Red Rock
sort of-
committed, or the hospital committed, or somebody committed, you could sell the papers to investors and they're gonna come over and spend $1 million in Lakeview to build 5 duplexes.
Yeah, so I guess my whole round spiel on it is that it's not an uncommon problem. I mean, we see it every time we go and build in, it's almost a mirror image of what Lakeview's going through. I think the struggle's just, that's part of being in rural Oregon, you know?
So
That's a good.
I think you or Randy asked about the opportunity zone
Yeah.
designation.
So the advantage that Lakeview has is that their whole community is opportunity zone. We met with an opportunity zone investor on Tuesday, and one of the reasons I came down is to understand what's available, because this guy is very interested in moving its opportunity zone or part of his fund into the state of Oregon, and especially rural Oregon. So we had a great meeting with him Tuesday, and I will follow up with him after this meeting. But when you look at a solution, you gotta start out with is what is your median per square foot rents in Lakeview? If you understand what that per square foot rent is, we can run all the numbers, and we can understand what we can afford to build and what the return on investment is to the investors that wanna come in and support it. If it's, I hate to
What's
give
the
you
best way to
numbers.
get that information?
Someone in town would have to tell us what the per square foot rent is.
Probably your realtors in town would probably be a good start, they might.
Well, Warner Valley Property
there's
Management,
property
they manage 85 properties, and the last time I talked to them, they didn't have anything for rent. So they can probably tell you what the average is.
So if someone can give me a median per square foot rent, then we can run the numbers. And so what Klamath is doing is sort of unique, is we have asked the city and county to donate land to a fund, land that they have excess, that we could build quality, affordable housing for the missing middle. And what we've talked about mostly here is the missing middle. It's those people that are not low income, but they need houses to stay in. We have gathered 34 people within our community to privately invest in this private equity fund. And we've had nice uptake. It's not set up yet, so I'm a little premature to talk about it, but the people that attended the meeting are interested in giving back, because we have a high risk of losing Kingsley Base, the Kingsley Airfield, which is $88 million a year to our economics within the Klamath County. So we need to do something. And then we'll take the investment and leverage it with a private equity firm. And so we'll go to 5-to-1 to 10-to-1 leverage. So if we raise $5 million, we'll have $50 million in the fund by overlapping $45 million from a private equity group. And so I've been impressed with the owner or the leadership within the community of stepping up on that part. And then we'll overlap it. That's why we're interviewing private equity groups at this point in time.
But the opportunity
So
zone is
the
what makes it attractive.
Yes,
to
the opportunity
investors.
zone
The opportunity
designation
zone,
is
if Klamath was
important.
all opportunity zone,
Oh,
this would be a
yeah.
lot easier for
Lakeview
me.
should be
And I mean,
advertising.
maybe there's an opportunity to set up a fund, an opportunity zone fund from people here locally interested in investing in their community.
Absolutely, and we'd be willing to help on that and just establish the meeting and get the
But
meeting
the
started.
last I heard, the opportunity zone hasn't been completed, it hasn't been finalized.
As of April of 2019, it's a go. You can invest anywhere you want.
It's a go, but it hasn't been completed how the program works.
Yeah, as of
They're done now.
April
Those
this year.
rules are done now.
It's done.
So this
The other
is a
thing,
follow-up
the other
item.
thing is, I would challenge both the county and city to look at their zoning.
I was just gonna ask also
We
about
have found out
surplus.
that less than 13% of the property available in the city of Klamath Falls is set up for multifamily and/or high-density living, which is not what it needs to be. And so we're creating rent burdens because we don't have the right housing and the right zoning set up within our community. And so both the county and city have agreed to look at their zoning and increase the density. So if you look at these lots that are 20 lots over, he said 26 lots over 10 acres, maybe that should be 52 lots over 10 acres. But those are things that the city and county would have to sit down with and talk about rezoning to creating higher density, which lowers the price per square foot, which obviously lowers the rent per square foot because of the investment that goes in.
Wait, Janine, do you wanna respond to that?
I would just agree that we just finished a housing needs analysis, and we do need to evaluate for more multifamily zoning,
Janine?
but we do need to have willing
So
owners.
our 20 acres to the south, that it has been platted for single, smaller lots, but is that possible to rezone to multifamily? We talked about, you and I talked, we talked
Yes.
about some duplexes along Second Street, which is on the north end of,
Which didn't require any.
but on the 20 acres, there's no development, it's just,
Right.
so is it possible to look at
Absolutely.
some multifamily zoning somewhere, 5 acres, 10 acres, whatever?
Absolutely.
So,
And, hold on just a second, parts.
oh,
Of the properties that are there any town or county-owned surplus properties that we should be aware of?
or schools, or
Or,
we're talking
yeah,
schools
I mean,
also.
buildings you're not using anymore that are residentially zoned, or,
Not in, not the town.
You talked actually ownership of county owns the property. Or with-
I'm just wondering if there's any publicly owned land that is considered surplus that could
So
be,
right next to the dorm camp there,
okay, so that's temporary housing.
well, right next to it, there's acreage there that could be, we've had some preliminary discussion about transitional housing, affordable housing, different things.
Okay,
It could be right next to Forest.
so that's an
Park.
asset that we should be aware of.
It's a possibility if the board was willing to put it on. There's, we always push private sector first, is what government.
But if we wanted to create a partnership,
Yep.
this is something you could potentially bring to the table. Randy?
So what we did is, we have a 4-step methodology. The first meeting was investors privately. We wanted to keep everything locally what we could before we opened it up outside of Klamath County. The second one was we met with employers. We had 8 of the largest 10 employers in Klamath County in that room, looking for the same thing that Matt talked about, is if we build it, will you come? And some of them can sign letters of intent. And they're very reluctant to do the guarantees, but the guarantees make our job a lot easier. And then we followed that up with city and county leadership to talk about zoning and correct that. And then we brought developers in. And so our next phase is to go back to the investors on our second meeting and find out what the appetite is for their raising local funds. And then we'll match up with a private equity group to leverage those funds.
Yeah, great, thank you for talking about your
Absolutely.
methodology. I think that's really helpful.
So, one question I have is, several of our employees are public entities. I believe that Lake District Hospital would be considered that. And we've got US Forest Service and BLM, Warner Creek, and what my concern is their ability to do any guarantees because of that. And they're a substantial
They can do letters of
number.
intent.
letters of, can you talk more about that?
It's just, they're saying this is our needs. You actually did it, and that did a great job of grabbing. You got 57 houses that you need permanently right now. That's your need list. And they can say, if they can back that up with a letter, we are increasing 17 people, we will need 17 doors. We try not to call them houses anymore because they might be multi-units, so 17 doors. It gives the financial institutes a lot more comfort that we understand there is a need. And I would say the one thing that I forgot to mention is that when we had the private equity group in, the last session was with local banking institutions, because we need local banks to take the takeoff loans when we're selling these properties to mitigate the risks to the investing firm or the private equity group. And they're ready to write loans, they just don't want to put up the money initially themselves and have the entire risk on their shoulders.
So I think the same banks are here in this community.
Where are the main banks here, Washington Federal?
Washington,
US.
the US. And,
Umpqua.
Is People's Bank here?
No.
Not as a
Pacific
physical.
Crest.
Pacific Crest is here.
Good. They were in the room.
And Randy, do you have a template letter of intent that you'd be willing to share?
We haven't got that far yet
Okay.
in regards to it. These are all the initial meetings. But we have a PowerPoint presentation that we'd be more than willing to go over and just show what we're doing and what the needs are, but it's very similar. We have about 6,400 jobs that will be coming to Klamath Falls in the next 3 years. But you do the arithmetic, it's like what everybody else said, 42 of those will be transitional jobs. You know, just the Swan Lake pump project is 3,400 jobs. But when it's done, it'll end up with 90 jobs, but during the construction phase. And so we're trying to get ahead of this, as Matt spoke about, before they break ground. And we're already behind. It sounds like we're in the same place that you guys are in. We're behind and trying to catch up and get ahead of it.
And we are in many places, as Matt mentioned. The things that I've noted so far as follow-up are some additional outreach to employers not currently represented. We heard a lot about the conditions of current houses and maybe the need for some sort of an inventory or a study on that topic, which I think is important for the overall picture, but not directly related to maybe increasing supply. It increases supply in terms of what Joaquin said, the picky wife, maybe. But I also, and then I think we need medium square foot rent. We can maybe follow up with Warner Valley Property Management. I'll just note that Ginger and Jessica and I will debrief after the meeting and figure out who's going to do what. And then some outreach to local.
This is Warner Valley right here.
Oh, how's that? We're gonna be calling you.
I've been texting him.
Do you know off the top of the head what the median square foot rent is in Lakeview?
That is a number that you cannot get to. Because you have houses that are 3-bedroom, 2-bath.
Exactly, it's all over the place.
That are in great shape, and houses that are 3-bedroom, 2-bath, same square footage that are horrible. So there's not a good number to use for that.
Is there a possible to have like a
3-bedroom, 2-bath.
3-bedroom, 2-bath in town, like a 1,500 square foot, is right around $900 or $1,000 a month.
That's higher than I'm seeing.
Rents have gone up a lot in Lakeview in the last year.
It's actually
It's $875.
lower than what I've been seeing, isn't it? $875?
There are some that are way higher.
Not for you, but
There are some in town that are for that, none that I have that are,
no.
they're asking $1,600 a month.
Is this enough anecdotal information? We actually need to do.
I thought you were saying that's a number per square foot. I'm saying no. We're targeting $1.30 to $1.40 a square foot for new build rentals.
So we're not even at $1.
So you've got,
Right.
you've got about a 30% scam.
I can tell you what we've been quoted for new construction in Lakeview by several of my owners have been quoted by local contractors here over $2 a square foot. About $2.30 a square foot of what they've been quoted in Lakeview.
What's the percentage of absentee landlords?
70%.
Okay, so somehow we need to get to addressing through some creative partnership, the difference between what you're getting for rent and what it's costing.
I could tell you that the rent is high here because of demand. You know, when we took over Warner Valley 2 years ago, and the rents weren't that. They probably increased by 30% in the last 2 years.
$230 a square foot to build?
I have 2 owners that recorded that, 2 separate owners. 230 is good.
So I've got a builder that will come out of Medford, he says for 120.
For 120, I could probably get him work.
Yeah.
Yeah, who is he?
All day long.
I have one that was gonna build I think he was looking at building 2 duplexes, we've got property here.
Scotty?
And he was, no, a different one. Scotty was one of them though, a different one. And he was quoted 220 a square foot.
It would be nice to build houses in Lakeview with Lakeview drywallers, plumbers, electricians, HVAC people.
There isn't any.
We don't have any Lakeview drywallers.
And so, yeah, so they're all gonna come out of
They're
fall from
Klamath
Medford.
and Memphis.
And hopefully that will start the juices flowing. I mean, I look at a painter in town that's gonna pull out of the valley.
We're pulling painters out of Bend right now.
Yeah.
I've got a
It's
project in the
amazing.
south end.
I don't know how else to do it without
We got painters from Bend
bringing
and
people
foreign
out of the
guys from
community,
Bend.
unfortunately. Unfortunately, they're not getting the jobs in Lakeview.
Put my barriers page up again.
Try to get a local plumber or electrician in Lakeview right now.
What do you have, 2?
They don't even
You
call
get on
you
the
that.
list, you'll be lucky to see him in about 3 or 4
I
years.
mean, they're not gonna build new houses because they don't need church.
Exactly.
Matt, what's your experience with that?
With what, sorry?
Sorry, I didn't
I was just
interrupt your
reading this.
conversation. So I'm hearing that there's a lack of skilled tradespeople here locally that are needed in order to do home building. Are you totally integrated? What's your business model and
Yeah,
how are you doing in finding electricians, plumbers, drywallers?
I think this is a trick question because it's, again, Lakeview and Klamath are one and the same, but, I don't know, it's definitely a problem in Oregon in general. There's a lack of drive for young people to wanna go into the work field, into the skill sets to learn this. That's a whole nother topic of discussion, but, we struggle every day to find people and we have some of our employees as a laborer or introductory carpenter can pull 6 figures a year, so we have a high rate of pay and we struggle to even find someone that wants to show up to work. So I would say it's a common problem, but once you get good employees, you can retain them. But that being said, we know the right companies to contract with and basically they know when our projects are coming because we put them out in front of them. And so a lot of our projects, since they're pre-negotiated, we don't even bother putting them on the street for a lot of the scopes. We'll pre-negotiate with an electrical company, a plumbing company, an HVAC company. The trades that we know are hard to find out when you go to public advertise because they're busy. So if we lock them in ahead of time, we give them a commitment, so it puts them on our books. You know, these construction projects for apartment complex, they take a year to develop. Well, if I give them a guarantee, like, hey, this is your project, if you don't blow the budget, if you meet the budget, you still have to bid it and you have to put skin into the game. You have to put time and your money and your resources into committing to us. But our commitment from Bogotay Construction back to you is we'll use you as the subcontractor if you can maintain our budget. So we don't find it as an issue. I don't see it as an issue coming to Lakeview. I'm a little shocked that there's no one out here, but it wouldn't be an issue for us to attract trades to come out here, I wouldn't think. But I think it's a common problem.
The key is you have to build 4 or 5 or 6 houses at one time. You can't build one at a time. You gotta bring over, people are gonna frame for a month and a half, or pour concrete foundations for a month and a half. You gotta do it, you've gotta do multiple houses. And then you can get people to come out of Klamath and Medford day in and day out.
Yeah, I know it's hurting Lakeview because I met with Red Rock. I spent about 4 hours with Red Rock about 2 months ago on housing, and they've lost some good permanent people, managers, that they were gonna move in the Lakeview area because of housing. They couldn't find suitable housing that was worth buying, it didn't need a $60,000 or $70,000 remodel, and there was not enough rental property there. We have 85 rentals right now, and I have nothing available.
So I don't know how we make this fit, or if it can fit, so have to be able to get the cost down. That seems where the problem is. We have the land, we have the need, the cost, it's economics.
But, I mean, they can come in and build at $120, $130 a square foot, that's pretty economical. But
Yeah.
$220, $230 is
So
not.
where I'm going with that is the government side of it, where I represent, is if there was a housing development come in, is there any, will it fit the opportunity zone, or will it enterprise zone? What is it? Is it tax deferred to the county? What's the government's play in this to try to make us more attractive, bring the price down? And I don't know what, as commissioners, board of commissioners, town councils, what we could do to try to make it more attractive for a developer to come in here.
So why don't I give you some information about what other counties
qualifies and what
and
doesn't
cities
qualify.
have done. Things like reducing SDCs, surplusing county-owned land. The opportunity zone opportunity really is for investors who are selling a prior investment, and they have some deferral on paying capital gains, and then they pay no tax on the gain from their new investment. So it's really a private sector opportunity more than a public sector, but I could
Well, they
put
can
that
sell it
together
after
for you.
10 years with no capital gains. I understand that part, but locally, does the town need to be looking at investing in infrastructure that's already paid for, maybe some way, so
Well,
the building costs go down? The
Yeah,
county
I mean,
has
you've
a
got,
problem.
we've heard from the folks at Creekside. I mean, if you've got 20 lots available at a fairly reasonable
Your
price.
fees over here are nothing, your building fees are
Yeah.
a bloody bargain.
Yeah, we were just saying that, I don't think our building fees have really changed or gone up in quite a few years.
That's nothing.
Brad, one of the things that we're recommending to the city and county is what we're calling it is accelerator, which is a subsidized or reduced property tax for the first year
Okay,
on any investment
sort
for
of
the
where I
first
was
3 years. Just give them 15% off their property tax and their investment for 3 years, just to stimulate. And so we're looking at some things, we've had some fairly good uptake from the council and the commissioners on
And
that.
I know there's some statutes around taxation and everything, so you probably have found out how we could probably consider that.
Yes, we're working on that to make sure that we're,
Yeah, information to the board of commissioners.
Randy, is that on new investment?
Yes.
New investment, yeah.
We're also looking at a refurbishment or remodel investment that for any person that would put $10,000 into their house, they would get 15% rebate on that $10,000 from the city or county. That one is not been met as friendly as the first one, but
Isn't that,
we're proposing it.
isn't there some benefit also if there was an urban renewal district that could be used for housing?
There could be.
And so urban renewal district is a tool that could potentially be put in place by government.
There was another hand up. Yes, sir.
Go ahead.
No, I was pointing at you.
This money you're talking about the governor's working on, can that be used for housing?
Yes, it is specifically targeted for housing.
Can it be used by private investment?
Yes, it would need to be, the thing that is most important is that it be in collaboration with an employer. So, so that it's really linked to providing housing for people who have jobs.
But that, it would have to be specific for that employer?
Not always. So we did 5 pilot projects last year, which are the model for this, and I can provide some information about those pilot projects. There is one pilot project that I'm aware of in partnership with GK Machine in the Willamette Valley, where There is, the public investment is in the infrastructure. And the company, I think, brought some land to the table. And then a private developer is going to develop that land with the expectation that many of the people who buy those homes are going to be working at GK Machine because they currently are living outside of town and have long commute distance. So the homes that are being proposed are specifically being developed for people at that income level so that they'll be very accessible to the employees. So that's one example where it's a creative partnership that involves an employer and so obviously a private developer as well.
But could those homes be sold to anybody?
Yes, they could be.
If you get a chance to send me a copy of those, we talked about those, sort of a synopsis of those 5.
Yes, I can do that. And then maybe Randy, one of the things that you and I could work on is a template, letter of intent, because I would be interested in the appetite of employers in Lakeview to think about something like that. And I think having something to look at is the best way to gauge your level of
Will a
comfort.
bank take a letter of intent, Randy? Will a bank take a letter of intent if you're not guaranteeing the rent?
A bank wouldn't, but a private equity firm and
Yeah,
private
a bank
individuals
won't
would.
take that.
Yeah, but I mean, if the government writes a letter of intent that
But it's
they're
not a
gonna
guarantee,
hire.
It's not a guarantee.
No, but
But-
that's when a public investor makes a decision of, hey, I have this letter from the United States Forest Service in Lakeview saying, hey, we have 15 permanent positions that we need to fill. We're struggling with housing. These are coming in 2020.
No guarantee.
Well, nothing in life's a guarantee, I get that, but, you know, when you have a letter of intent, instead of someone just having a conversation with one person from the office and the next person in the office gives it different, you have a letter of intent, the odds are that you, as a private investor, you might be more comfortable of going over the edge. But that's where equity investors come into the equation, because this is an opportunity zone, so this is more about where people can put their money to offset taxes and defer their taxes and avoid capital gains. So Lakeview has a unique advantage.
And I don't want to put you on the spot, Matt, but you're the only builder here. Is $220 or $230 a square foot what your costs are?
We don't build houses, that seems very high for
Very high.
introductory
These
housing.
seem like Ben prices,
He just told
actually.
me,
Yeah.
he
My
told me
hus-
that worked fine.
Yeah, but the government wants to pay us $230 a house or square foot for houses, we'll go build houses.
Might start building.
Yeah, we'll start, especially for an introductory.
We're not going back to Klamath this
We're not going, we're gonna create a satellite office in Lakeview. Yeah.
Well, it depends on how high-end a home you're building.
Yeah.
You can build a, home that isn't gonna have granite countertops and hardwood floors, and you can build it cheaper per square foot than you can a high-end.
Residential
Quality that you're
Joaquin?
looking for.
I don't want to put you on the spot, but what's the average wage going to be at Red Rock for the people working there?
Hourly people, well, that's a tough question, but probably for managers, you're looking about $90,000 average, $100,000.
That's, so they can afford a
For
nice house.
for managers. Hourly people, I don't know, it could be 50, 60.
But still, somebody who can afford a house.
That's the higher end.
We're looking at 50 and always, John.
So that's,
So,
so really it goes down to that median price per square foot. So a wise person once told me it's size, quality, and price.
Size, quality,
Pick any
cost.
two.
Cost.
Yeah.
so Joaquin, is
So-
it 90,000?
Yeah,
Hold on a
and
second,
so
just straight in. Hold on a second, just
If
right-
if rents need to come in at $1 a square foot, that'll be a different house than $1.40 a square foot. And so we really need to understand the median rents so that we can understand. And that's what we did with the 8 employers, is we showed them exactly what you're saying, what are your wages? Can they afford $1,500 a month rent or above? And all 8 said they could be above that $1,575, which is a $63,000 a year job. That's how it's figured.
If you're not spending more than 30% on rent.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
You see, a lot
Ginger,
of-
did you have a question?
No, that's okay.
A lot of my larger investors I deal with, I've got 2 or 3 owners that have 20-plus houses here in Lakeview. And they base their purchase on a house, and they've got to be able to rent that house for 1% of their purchase price to regain their investment.
Yeah.
So that, you know, and that's what you look at on your square foot building also. Because if I build that house, am I gonna get that 1%?
That'd be inexpensive, yeah.
Yeah.
That's never gonna pencil here.
No?
Okay, so
Yes, exactly.
I want to go back
So
to
you gotta
maybe,
be, I mean, to be competitive with Lakeview, you're gonna be 120, 130,000.
Yeah.
And that's gonna be on the upper end of the rental market.
so I know Jessica, Ginger, and I did our best to get local builders here. And I really appreciate, Matt, that you came, and Linda, I know your husband did some building at some point, so it's good to have that perspective. But I think maybe some follow-up with that group of folks would be helpful. In addition, I'm wondering if maybe some of the follow-up here should be in more targeted meetings rather than a large meeting with all different interests represented. So I'm thinking employers, banks and investors, builders, as sort of some of our next steps. Other suggestions in terms of next steps?
Brenda, how many builders do we have?
What was the housing study you referenced that you guys just completed and who did it?
It's the LCD grant.
It's the same one that Climate has done, we have one for Lakeview also.
So it's probably not extremely helpful.
It's not a market analysis.
No.
Okay.
Do we need a market analysis, Matt?
I don't, I was just wondering if you guys had one because it might be helpful for you. But, yes, maybe, I don't know.
Ginger, we still have that money in our Brownsfield grant to do the market analysis work. So we have funds to do the market analysis piece in a grant that we received that we're doing here.
Okay.
So if I know what that would look like, what that needs to look like, you know, a kind of an example of that, we can make sure that we can provide that.
Yeah, the scope of work is in the process, so that would be helpful.
Okay. Other follow-up items?
What about the types of houses? Nobody's talked about tiny houses or prefabs. I know that's inimical to builders, but
So I think that's a great point. Thank you for raising it. We did have, I did write down zoning for smaller lots. I don't know to what extent there's zoning that allows for tiny homes.
So speaking for the county, you can build a tiny home anywhere in the county.
can you
Once
haul
have
one in
land
from
use,
Portland?
There's no minimum lot size for a home in the county.
So yeah, you could have it, or it could be a manufactured or a stick-built tiny home, I think is what I'm hearing. Yes, sir.
My construction people that come to my office are dying for qualified employees. In particular, you talk about your drywalls, your welders, your plumbers, your electricians. One thing that's been missing in the discussion here is education. How do we get to keep the kids that graduate from high school, how do we keep them here? At the hospital, we've got the program with KCC for continuing education, getting the CNAs to be certified so that they can come to work at the hospital. Is there any way that we can get better participation from like KCC or anybody else? And then you're talking about, you know, the multi-million-dollar investment from OHSU into Klamath Falls. Well, that's outside money. How do we get that sort of money to come to Lakeview for housing, or say the hospital, or the DOC, or whomever? We need some serious investment, and it's hard to get locally because people here are broke.
Tell me who you are, please.
Oh, I'm Don Leacoat. I'm a CPA.
Oh, thank you. So I meant to include, so the things that I've noted here in red are follow-up items. I do think some follow-up with the school district and Klamath Community College is something that we will undertake. I know Klamath Community College has been targeting tradespeople In fact, they're looking at building a new center to train tradespeople, and we have provided them some support for that. But, you know, it's got to start, what I've heard from other communities that I work in is that it needs to start earlier than that. I mean, you need to do that, but you also probably need to include people at the high school level. So this is another follow-up item for us. Other suggestions for next steps?
Well, the one thing hasn't been talked about has been talked around, and I've pushed this mainly with Jeff Matanek at Red Rock, and that's company housing. The old days, the mills had it figured out. There's company housing and investment of the company, and then that helps keep you employees there. It's an investment. And
are those homes owned by the company then?
Yeah, in the old days, yes, it was owned by the company, they were rented by the employees. I just think that trying to think outside the box today, you know, if the private sector thinks outside the box, how do they try to retain employees? If they have company housing, that's nice company housing, that employees get at a certain rate, maybe the longevity of the employees stick around longer. You know, I'm government talking on the private sector side right now, but you got to think outside the box.
What kind of feedback has Jeff given you?
Actually, we've had some good conversations. You know,
He's open, they're open for that
Yeah,
option.
and at the same time, you're probably spending all your money getting your site built, right? So
there was no money set aside for that
Right.
part of it. But there's a huge cost for turnover in companies also, so.
So I think that is part of what we should explore when we know what is available for these employer partnerships.
And so,
Is what are employers willing to put on the table and contribute to the solution.
That's something.
On the government side, I just heard Mike say a little bit earlier, that when he's in Bly, he lives in government housing.
Yep.
So the Forest Service, BLM, why aren't they investing in government housing, which our private sector would probably build the housing, and then that takes some of the pressure off of needing housing. We don't have to reinvent all the wheels, but maybe go back, look at some of the things that's been done and successful.
Typically, it's in the smaller communities they have government housing.
Well, we're not real huge here.
I know. Bly is smaller. Bly is smaller. Paisley's smaller.
Yeah.
Paisley and Silver Lake.
I don't know what that magic cutoff is, but you know, I don't think John Day has government housing for their permanent employees.
So,
But
we don't care
can find
what,
out.
think outside
we
the
don't
box.
care what that is, the need today is what the need is, in my view.
Yeah,
But let's think about it.
We could certainly find out if there are criteria around what that would look like and what it would take to live that. Other follow-up items or suggestions? I want to thank you all for coming. I hope that we can take this feedback, the follow-up items, and come up with some good next steps. And then Ginger and Jessica and I will figure out the best way to communicate what that looks like. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you.